Hi everyone, welcome to the latest episode of Got China. Today we'd like to build on our last program and take a broader look of the state of the Chinese economy. And we're very privileged to invite with us Professor Yao Yang of Peking University to join us today. Professor Yao Yang really needs no introduction. He's one of the most renowned economists in China and a leading voice in the public discourse. And he's also the author of a recent book, China and the West, a pragmatic Confucian's view. So it's on Amazon, so make sure you get it. Thank you for being with us, Professor Yao.
My pleasure.
And also, of course, we have JJ, who's been a familiar face with us. He's a fellow with the Xinhua Institute.
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today, especially sit with Professor Yao again. Actually, we talked about China's economy at the very beginning this year, so very excited to talk with him again. Yeah.
Right, that's exactly what I want to start this conversation with. I mean, you obviously had a similar one with Professor Yao at the beginning of this year, and it's featured on your podcast. And it's almost about the same topic, the Chinese economy. And obviously a lot has happened since your last conversation. Could you maybe set the stage for us? What has happened in the past year?
Yeah, first of all, every December, China is going to hold a Central Economic Work Conference. So in January this year, I sat down with Professor Yao to talk about last year's December's Central Economic Work Conference,
right,
which set economic agenda for this year. And as you just mentioned, actually there are lots of things happened after that. Especially, in July, we have our third plenary, which actually, launched a new reform plan. And
a very big moment.
Yes, and in December, I think especially, in September. In September the 26th, we have a very special political bureau meeting on economy. Right. And I think after that, we saw lots of very important policies was being rolled out.
Well, in fact, Got China has a program on both of those events, the third plenum in July and the Politburo meeting in September. So if you're interested, go check them out.
Yes, and in December, we have our Central Economic Work Conference again, which set the economic policy agenda for next year, for the year of 2025.
Right.
So I think today is a great opportunity for us to sit down with Professor Yao to talk about all the things happened and also the things will happen in the future.
Right, and frankly, there has been a lot of challenges and problems with the Chinese economy, and I think the readouts of the Central Economic Work Conference has made that abundantly clear. But on the other hand, we're seeing that China is on its ways to realize the annual economic growth target of around 5%. So I imagine that indicates a lot of those challenges and problems has been dealt with.
If you look at the performance of the Chinese economy this year, you see a lot of ups and downs. But in general, the economy itself is healthy, particularly if you look at export. Right? This year, I believe export is going to grow by 5 to 7%. Last year, it merely grew, right? But this year is much higher. Probably export is going to contribute to GDP growth by 20%. Or probably even higher, right?
Does that surprise you, or is meet your expectation?
Yeah, it was a little bit surprising because China is already the largest exporter in the whole world, right? But that says a lot about the comparison of economic size and also growth in the world. The world cannot go away without China. Okay, because the size of the Chinese economy is so huge, particularly the manufacturing sector is so huge. It's 35% of the world manufacturing output, which is more than the sum of G7, right? So although the United States is trying to decouple with China, the whole world has been coupled with China even more, right? So that shows the strength of the Chinese economy. Okay. Another bright spot is the slowdown of the decline of the housing market. The housing market is still declining, but we see, particularly, you talk about the September 26th meeting, right? After that meeting, we see a lot of positive signs in that sector. So people are responding to government policy, and we see last month, November, housing sales became positive year on year.
Right.
So that has not happened in 3 years.
Well, I think even the price has been going up for a little bit,
Yeah, a little bit.
marginally,
Right,
in
right,
Beijing at
right.
least.
Yeah, I
So-
think you previously also mentioned that do not ignore the importance of housing sector in China's economy.
Right.
Do not ignore, do not underestimate that, even in the future, right?
Right. So the government has taken some measures, right, to buttress people's confidence in the sector, and the people are responding to that, right? And also, if you look at the investment in manufacturing sector, as a whole, it hasn't grown that much. But if you look at the high-tech sector, manufacturing investment has been growing by a really respectable rate. Right? So those are kind of encouraging signs. And because of that, people's mood has changed, right? Particularly if you look at the stock market, right? So starting from 2,500, but now stabilized between 3,300 and 3,500. Right?
Right. We've seen some growth since September. I mean,
Yeah,
there was a
yeah.
big rise
Right.
in late September, and then a kind
Especially
of
after the before the National Day holiday.
Right,
yeah,
right,
and
right.
sort of stabilized at a high
Right,
point.
right. So those are the encouraging signs.
And because of those, you think that those are the reasons that China is able to achieve that 5%
Yeah.
growth goal.
Around
for-
5%,
Around
right.
5%.
Right,
yeah,
right.
Which is good news. But if we compare last year's Central Economic Work Conference, which set the tone for policies this year, do you think there were things that, like challenges that were unexpected that emerged this year? New trends that came onto the radar?
So in last year's Economic Work Conference, the government already noticed there is a serious lack of demand in China, right? So that's why in this year, the government has geared up support to boost demand in China. But probably the speed of recovery has not reached the expectation. So that's why starting in late September, the central government has issued several stimulus package again. So then if you read the readouts of this year's work conference, you see the government used more severe wording to describe the current situation. Right? So the work conference has set the tone for next year. There will be more fiscal stimulus, and the tone is very much like the tone, the wording the central government used after 2008. Right? So that's an encouraging sign. I have a high hope for next year's government policy.
I mean, thank you for outlining pointing out some of the most important points mentioned in the Central Economic Work Conference this year. But let's get to that a little bit later on.
Okay.
And maybe take one step back and look at the Politburo meeting in September. Because in recent readouts, it's become clear that the central government considered the Politburo meeting in September as a momentum moment in this year. They said a lot of measures were taken, decisive measures or steps were taken to boost the economy. So looking back at that point, Why do you think that meeting and all the policies that came after that meeting in late September, early October, why do you think those were considered a very key moment in this year's economy?
Well, I think in the very beginning of this year, the government put a lot of efforts into boosting consumption, right? So like the replacement program, the central government pledged, I think, 200 billion for this program, right? But the problem is that the consumption is a slow variable, right? It depends first on the growth of income, and second, expectation. Okay, so there were some positive signs of the. You look at particularly the car market, right? So this year probably we are going to sell more than 30 million cars in China.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a historical, not historical, but in recent years, that's really high, okay? Big growth, particularly when we look at the domestic brands, now it's already 60% of total sales, okay? But as I said, the consumption is a slow-moving variable, okay? So by the middle of the year, we saw some signs of a weakening of the demand side, right? So I think that's why the government said we should have more direct physical spending to stimulate the demand.
So did we see those policies materialize after the Politburo meeting? Do you think that has taken a positive effect?
Well, first, the stock market has been stabilized, okay? That's good, because there is a wealth effect, right? If the people see asset prices grow up, then they're going to feel kind of richer, then they're going to spend more, right? So we did see some positive signs. For example, in National Day holidays, we saw spending went up, right? Not just the number of people going out, but the spending really went up, right? And also people began to buy new apartments again, right? And if you look at the industrial side, we also see some growth over there. But we have to keep the momentum, okay? Right, because otherwise, those policies are going to become kind of pause, right? And after this pause, then people say, "Oh, we expect more, but the government didn't roll out more policy." So that's why, in the new work conference, the government is using kind of heavier wording.
Right.
There is some discussions, because you just mentioned about expectations.
Right.
There are some discussions about, especially after the September 26th meeting, some say that it's actually a response to some, no matter it's like the capital market or it's like some experts' expectation about China's policies. So people are discussing about the policy making process. I know you previously also you attended important high level meetings. We saw that from Xinwen Lianbo that people high level officials consult experts' ideas, including you. How do you comment on the current from your perspective that the policy making process involving the public's opinion or the experts' opinion into it and make more targeted policy makers? Do you agree with that? Nowadays we saw like the policymakers pay much more attention to the experts' opinion, or previously it's also worked the same, right?
Oh, the outside China, there are doubts about whether the government continues to listen to experts. I would say, actually the government still welcomes expert opinions like before, right? But it takes time for our voice to get heard, right, by high-level government officials. Right? At the beginning of each year, the government set up a plan for this year, right? So there is kind of a momentum, and also you can also say inertia over there, right? So, the government has to implement its plan first, but then gradually the government is going to listen to what people say in the market and also what experts say. But the more importantly, to look at the data, statistics coming into the center. Okay, I think that's more decisive. Okay.
So I think, so you were saying that the central government is very responsive to the realities on the ground and also opinions from experts like yourself. That's why it's able to respond to a lot of these emerging challenges in a timely manner. And I think one of those examples is dealing with the local debt issue, because going back to the September Politburo meeting, we all remember that the local debt swap program was a prominent feature, and it caught a lot of people's attention because a lot of people say that local debt is really putting a hindrance on the Chinese economy. So do you think that has taken some effect since?
Dealing with local government, that's is not a new move. Right? It started probably from 2018. The pandemic kind of interrupted that process. Okay, so after the pandemic, the central government picked up this issue again. Right, so it actually started from last year. Okay, so initially the plan was for each local government, provincial government, to deal with its own debt separately. But gradually, the central government realized it wouldn't work if you ask every province to deal with its own debt separately. Some provinces can do that, like Shanghai, Beijing, Jiangsu. They can do that.
The richer ones.
The richer ones, right? But for those kind of poor ones, you need some assistance from the central government. Right? So that's why the central government began this debt swap program. Okay. But we have to be careful in doing that, particularly when we need some kind of fiscal stimulus package over there, right? Because debt swap moves the repayment responsibility from off-balance sheet to on-balance sheet. Now, local governments are mandated to repay all the debts, right? So at least in the short run, local governments actually have to spend more on repaying their debts, right? But now we need them to spend more. So there is some risk over there, right? So that's why I think the work conference is on the right direction, because it says we are going to have a more active fiscal policy. To me, that means to give more money for local governments to spend on the real economy, not to repay the debts.
Right. Right. On that cue, let's move on to the this year's Central Economic Work Conference. There are several points that really caught my attention, and I think a lot of people's attention. A lot of those terms are some mentioned either for the first time or the first time in a very long time.
Right.
And so let's go down the list one by one. The first is, of course, boosting, or I should say vigorously boosting the consumption, is I think listed as task number one for the next year. It was task number 2 last year, but this year they elevated to the task number 1. So could you give us a big picture of what is consumption like right now in China, and why the big urgency to boost consumption?
Well, numbers tell us the story, right?
Right.
The most important number is the increase of household saving. Okay. Last year, household saving increased by 17 trillion.
Okay.
Right? People always say, "Oh, people don't have money, so people don't consume." That's wrong.
Okay.
People have money.
17 trillion.
It's just 17
trillion, right? That's a huge number. Okay. So the problem is that people don't have confidence. Okay, so people don't consume. Okay, and this year probably a little bit less, but still going to be 15 trillion, 16 trillion. So that's still a huge number. Okay, so the problem eventually comes down how to reduce people's saving and induce people to consume more. Right. As I said, the government has already began this replacement program. Right.
Replacing household appliance,
right,
your cars,
right,
consumer goods trading program.
Right. So that has worked, but not has reached our expectation. Right. So if the government wants to continue this program, I highly recommend the government get rid of those categorization of the purchase, right? It's just to give people, say, the discount, right? You get a coupon.
As vouchers.
Yeah, a voucher, right? It's just an electronic voucher.
Yeah.
Right. So ask a central bank to use as digital money. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Actually,
I think Shanghai is doing this, right? Shanghai, some city are doing this.
That
number is good, right?
Exactly. But Shanghai's the quantity is too small. It's only 150 million. It's just it's just 秒光. You cannot get it, right?
It's gone in seconds.
Right. It's just in seconds, right? It's because there's no restriction. Then of course people have the incentive to get the coupon, and that's a discount. I think at 15 or 20% discount, whatever you buy.
Right? I purchased a computer to play the Black Myth Wukong, but didn't got a coupon. I hope I can get a coupon to buy the computer because it's very expensive.
In fact, on our last program, we had another guest, Robert Wu. He's in Shanghai, so he told us about this consumption vouchers that the Shanghai people got, and he said it was very encouraging.
Yeah.
He went on the street and thought it was the busiest he saw Shanghai in years. He said the vouchers were very effective in driving people away from their homes into the market, into the shops, and start spending.
Yeah, but the number is too small. To me, to make it work, I think we have to do it big, right? For example, the 200 billion should be all spent on this kind of unrestricted vouchers.
And of course, on a national level.
National level, right? Or even bigger, right? If you ask me, I would say we should have 1.4 trillion, not the 200 billion, right? So on average, each person gets 1,000 yuan.
1,000 yuan.
Think about Shanghai. Shanghai is the size of the economy. Shanghai probably is about 1 in 25 of the Chinese economy, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
We'll check it later.
4% or something of the Chinese economy, right? So that means it's more than 5 trillion. That's the size of the Shanghai economy. 150 million is just nothing.
Right.
Okay. It should be, to me, it should be at least 10 billion for Shanghai.
Right. And aside from the consumption vouchers, another approach the government has recommended is give more money to the poor groups.
The low and middle income
the lower income people.
To elevate their burdens.
Like these senior citizens, like people who've lost their jobs, or people who are handicapped, those lesser privileged groups of people, so that they would feel more comfortable spending more money.
I actually read one of your article on 文化纵横 recently, the Beijing Cultural Review.
Right.
You discuss about the social welfare system,
right.
Also the Marxism theory, which mentioning about the importance of comprehensive and free development of every single individual.
Right.
And as the economy develops to a certain level, the social welfare system should also be developed to take care of the middle and low income people. Actually, I think that article is published before the Economic World Conference. Then we saw the Economic World Conference mention about low income importance. I don't know if it's a coincidence or can you elaborate it more to our audience why it's important, why the central government responds to the middle and low income people's needs.
I I don't know. You have to ask the editor of the Beijing Cultural Review, right? Maybe he has some sense, right? But anyway, he asked me to write an article on that because we know each other quite well. So he knew my understanding of the issue, right? I think we need a theory to talk about so-called welfare state in China. Otherwise, people will say, hey, if we increase welfare, then we are going to become welfare country. Then that's bad, right? We are going to, so-called 养懒人, people are going to depend on welfare, right? So that's why ordinary people don't like this notion of welfare state, right? So to me, we have to go back to Karl Marx, or his vision of communism. Okay, to me, like you said, the most statement in Communist Manifesto was that a communist society should boost everyone's capability, right? The liberation of each individual is the precondition for liberating the whole humankind, right? And the free and comprehensive development of everyone is going to be the goal of communism, right? I think that's the starting point for socialism, okay? That's kind of if you want to build a theory, that's the axiom, right, of socialism, okay? Starting from there, then you can think about how we should go with so-called welfare state, okay? In a capitalist society, welfare is kind of the price of votes, right? As an incumbent, I give you welfare, you vote for me. It's a vote buying mechanism, right? In China, we are a socialist country, right? We don't need that, okay? So how to defend welfare? I think that's Karl Marx communism, or the ideal of communism, to boost everyone's capability.
Because I think you mentioned in the article that the society actually will have some resistance to the market when the market develops very fast. Because a single market without the government actions cannot take care of every single individual's needs, right?
Right. Yeah, that's Karl Planey's idea in his book Great Transformation, right? I think he was talking about the capitalist society, right? There were, particularly in the 19th century, there was fierce class struggle. Okay, so but after the First World War, there was kind of a great moderation of class struggle. But then gradually, welfare state was built, and then welfare became kind of the price of votes. But that was also why socialism came out. Socialism want to change the system, right? Then to find kind of a grand solution to the problems of capitalism, right? So with that, I think when we talk about the welfare, we should talk about investing into people, right? To boost people's basic capability, okay? That should be the fundamental goal of our welfare.
It's actually also mentioned in the third plenary sessions readout. I think you mentioned that in an offline speech. I was at that meeting. You mentioned that it mentioned that even before the 共同富裕, the common prosperity. I mentioned about the comprehensive development people, which is aligned with what you just mentioned.
Right. Yeah. So this time I think it's the right move. We are going to invest into the low end of the population, right? So we should not see pension, healthcare as just a handouts of welfare to ordinary people. It's to increase people's capability, right? If you think about this, if one is bed bound, can you ask him or her to be responsible for the society? he cannot be responsible for himself or herself, right?
Right.
So when you provide, the state and the society provides health care to this person recovers, then he or she can contribute to the society and then make a living for herself or himself. Right? That's the purpose of welfare. And I think that there are ample opportunities for China to do that.
Okay, I think, Professor, you illustrated one approach that perhaps down the road that China could to do more on. And the next term that I want to ask is more proactive fiscal policies. It's very significant because this is the first time in Chinese official document that it formulates this term, more proactive fiscal policies.
Right.
Why do you think, what do you think is the significance of this term?
Yeah, I think I can talk about the two aspects. One is that because we are still in the shadow of this long COVID, right? So look around the world. All the countries have had really proactive fiscal policy because that's how the textbook has taught us. Okay, so in theory, if you really want to walk out of this long shadow, right, you have to have proactive fiscal policy. Okay, and second, if you look at this year as performance, right, the government has already taken up a lot of measures, particularly on the consumption side, right. It has achieved substantial goals, but as I said, has not met people's expectations. Okay, so I think that's why the government now is using those heavy words, right? Proactive fiscal policy.
Would you like to care to take a guess what a more proactive fiscal policy would entail?
What about the deficit to GDP ratio will be maybe from I read some overseas news predicting that maybe it will change from 3% to around 3% to 4%, the deficit to GDP ratio. That's a big number. That's lots of money, right?
Well, I don't think that's the most important. 1% of GDP is only 1.3 or 1.4 trillion, right? So eventually that's not a huge number, but it's indicative because we are talking about the central government deficit, right? The Chinese central government has been really fiscally prudent. Right. It has always said that's a 3% deficit of GDP. That's kind of a golden rule, right? Never violate. Okay, but so that's why I said it's indicative. So if the government moved to 4% of GDP, that's a big move. Okay, but more important than that, I would like to see more fiscal spending transfer to local governments, right? Local governments now have a really tight budget, right? And many of them are running on deficits, okay? That has never happened before, okay? Why? First, over the last several years, the central government has issued several rounds of tax cuts. I think the central government, the total amount of tax cuts has been about 4 trillion. That's huge. You have to think about the scale. The total government revenue is only about 22 trillion. So 4 trillion is really significant. Okay. And then second, the local governments are losing their income from land sales. The highest point, it was 8.7 trillion. This year probably is going to be only 3 trillion. Okay, and then third, of course, there was a lot of spending during COVID. That was necessary, right? So now the local governments are having really tight budget, and many of them are running deficits, right? So I would like to see the central government transfer more spending, more income to local governments to cover their deficit, local governments' deficits. Okay, that's very important. Okay, so for one thing, local government's spending accounts for almost 30% of China's total demand. That's huge, 30%. Okay, so if local governments don't spend, or their spending are declining, that's going to have a huge implication for the national demand. Okay, and second, if they pay the employees, pay their arrears, business arrears, their debts to private and SOEs, then companies are going to get money. Okay, so they are going to have more cash to spend, and people's confidence are going to come back. Okay,
so it's going to start the circulation going.
Right. So I hope. That's why I believe physical expansion is really key for next year's economic recovery.
I think, in fact, the third plenum, the communique has touched on this point. I think it mentioned something about restructuring the allocation of funds between the central government and local government, and I think it hinted that they're going to allocate more income to the local government. And we even discussed it in one of our previous Got China programs. We thought that might be a long-term solution to the local debt problem that the local governments are facing.
Yeah, some people have done some calculation. That move is going to increase local government's revenue by about 2 trillion. So that's substantial, and that's going to help. But the distribution of this increase is not even. It's going to be concentrated in some provinces because mostly it's on consumption tax. But consumption tax in China is really concentrated in several sectors: cigarettes and alcohol. Right? So you can imagine probably Guizhou, Yunnan, Sichuan, and also Hunan are going to get a lot. Other provinces probably not that much.
I see. So let's move on to the monetary policy side. Again, this year's Central Economic Work Conference mentioned that we're going to pursue a moderately loose monetary policy. And again, it's been made clear that this term appeared for the first time in 14 years. Last time it appeared was 2008. So could you elaborate what significance do you think the reappearance of this term means?
Yeah, I think it shows that the central government had realized there is an urgency in the economy, right? When we go back to 2008, that was just after the financial crisis, right? So the government, central government at that time, I think made the right decision that was really timely, and then the program was big enough. So that's why the Chinese economy kept growing while other economies slowed down substantially. Okay. So in that sense, I actually have a little bit different opinions about so-called 4 trillion stimulus package. Right? I think that has done a lot of good to the Chinese economy. So I kind of hope the central bank is going to lower the interest rate substantially, right? Because think about China's total amount of debts, or M2. So now what's the total? It's almost let's say 250 trillion or even higher. Okay, So even you lower the interest rate by 1% or even 0.5%, people or companies are going to save a huge amount of interest payment, right? So that's going to boost people's incentive to buy homes, okay, and also boost the company's incentive to invest. Okay? And that's good because the interest rate is a single most important price in the financial sector. Everyone just knows it, right? It's a uniform across the board. Okay, so that's one thing. And second, not just you lower the interest rate. I think the central bank should do is to truly open up or normalize the lending process. Now we still have many restrictions on the lending process, particularly for real estate developers. Okay, because the central government already said we should normalize the real estate sector. Okay, or the real estate sector has been already normalized. So that means that we should normalize the lending process. That's also very important to stabilize the real estate sector because that's also one of the goals set by the World Conference.
I see. Obviously, the Central Economic Work Conference mentioned a lot of important points, but we'll just do one more, which has to do with high quality productive forces. China is betting big on having high technology as a major driver for its economy down the road. Standing at where you are, standing at where we are right now, how do you evaluate the potential momentum of the high tech that China's high tech can offer to the Chinese economy?
Well, I see a lot of potentials in China's high-tech growth. Right? Trump, in his first term, began this trade war with China and began this export control on chips, particularly on chips. Right? But it has served nothing to American interests. Right? The only function was to serve as a wake-up call for China. Okay, so you can see since 2018, China's investment into semiconductors has increased dramatically. Right. China's self-sufficient rate in semiconductor has increased rapidly. And this year, guess what? China's export of chips is going to be 1 trillion RMB. Okay. China is moving to become one of the largest chip exporter. Okay, this is not just what I have been saying. Some Americans are saying the same. In Foreign Affairs, there is a recent article by Scott Kennedy, who's from CSIS, right? So he says the same thing. American policy on China has achieved almost nothing to the United States. And he calls for the Trump administration to change the course. I think he's a few Americans who have this clear mind. Okay, so I see a lot of potentials in China. But many outside observers believe there's a contradiction between high quality growth, high quality productive forces and the consumption. No, there's no contradiction over there, right? China is big enough. On the one hand, we can boost the consumption. On the other hand, we can boost technological progress.
I see.
I think in the same, because I think the new quality productive forces was mentioned as the second task of all the 9 tasks mentioned by the readout. And in the same paragraph, it also mentioned about comprehensively rectify the rat-race irrational competition, or we call it 综合整治内卷式竞争. I think previously we saw some meeting mention about the rat-race irrational competition but the word used was prevent it from happening. Now we were saying that comprehensively rectify. It seems that we adopt a more active approach to such type of actions. Can you elaborate how such type of competition hurt the economy and why we have to comprehensively rectify this? I think you mentioned about local government and enterprises in that sentence when it mentioned about the irrational rat-race competition.
I think there are kind of two aspects of the problem. One is excessive competition among companies, particularly in the EV sector, right?
And lots of companies cut prices.
Right.
Actually, consumers benefit from a short-term perspective, right?
Yeah.
But I think maybe it's not good for the long-term development.
Right. Another aspect is the local government's competition, right? They also compete. And then the competition, when they merge together, then you see a lot of local government's subsidies to the companies. When we talk with American friends, they always say, "Oh, the central government, Chinese government has subsidized the industry too much." Our response is always look at the EV sector.
But the U.S. government is also doing the same. They
Right.
also subsidize their companies.
Right, and also at the central government level, there is almost no subsidy to the EV sector, right? Nowadays, most of the subsidies to EV sector stems from the competition among local governments. Right? Some of those protectionism of local governments. So that's why the central government has realized this problem, right? I think this is the second time and the State Council issued documents or directives to curb local government's competition and also subsidies out of competition, right? No, I don't know. I'm not an expert on the so-called monopoly case, but I have a sense that some companies probably have this predatory pricing strategy, right? They cut their price below their cost. That's called predatory pricing.
To push out other people.
Yeah, to push out other people. Then we can use our anti-monopoly law, right, to prevent this. Okay. Clearly, some companies actually say this openly. We are losing money, right? But we have to cut our price. That's not right. Okay. If you cannot compete with above your cost, you're out. Okay. You cannot do this kind of predatory pricing. It hurts long-term growth. It hurts investors' interest. Okay. But of course, the government can also do another thing. That is encourage our companies to move some of the capacity to other countries, right? So we can just ease the competition within domestic market.
And that capacity which was being moved to other countries will also maybe help the local employment in other countries as well?
Yes. Well, for example, EU, right, announced this so-called punitive tariff on China. I think that's just an excuse, right? When I talk with Europeans privately, they say, "Oh, it's not about the subsidy. We also subsidize our industry. We are going to subsidize our EV sector anyway." Honestly, it's because Chinese EVs are just too competitive. Okay, we have to do something. Okay. So I see that Chinese government is taking the right move, right? China has not adopted any retaliation moves. That's good, right? Instead, Chinese government has been talking with EU, right, to solve this problem, replacing high tariff by some kind of a self-restraint and also mandatory higher prices. That's much better, right? At least Chinese companies earn more, right? So that's a right approach. But in the meantime, we are encouraging our companies to invest in European countries, like in Hungary, Spain, and also Italy, and Belgium. Okay, that's good. That's the right direction. I even encourage MG, the Shanghai automobile worker, to move at least part of the MG production back to UK. Right. I heard the factory is still there. They can just install the assembly line over there and make a probably high-end MG. Right. So it can still make money. Right? For example, Range Rover is no longer a UK brand, right? It's an Indian brand, but it's still made in UK. It's still making handsome money. Okay. MG can do the same.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that China is not responding to some of these protective trade measures put up by European countries, because one other word that I noticed in this year's Central Economic Work Conference is unilateral opening up. Yeah. I think it hints that, regardless of what other countries do, what tariffs...
Voluntary and unilateral.
Yeah, voluntary unilateral opening up.
Right.
So that says, regardless of what other countries do, China should always go for opening up ourselves. And I think just yesterday, China greatly expanded the visa-free transit program that allowed more foreign...
40 countries.
54 countries.
54 countries.
They can stay for 10 days, which is a very long time.
And you did a map, explaining how it works.
Well, I did a newsletter on that. And so I think is that a new thing in your perspective, or is that why is China going about this approach?
I think that's a right move. We can talk about this from a historical perspective first. Let's think about this. Who takes the banner of free trade in the hand? The winner of world trade. Usually the strongest manufacturing country. Right? Starting from Great Britain, right? And then United States, then Japan, and today, of course, China. Right? Because China has benefited from free trade. Okay, and of course, China should take up the banner and say we promote the free trade in the world, right? Because that's in our interest, right? But more than that, it's also in the world's interest, right? President Xi Jinping has repeatedly saying China now is moving to the center of the world stage, right? So I see this unilateral opening up as a move for China to take more international responsibility and also to lead the world, right? China is already in the center of the world stage, right? So China now is standing on a higher moral ground and say, we're going to open up to the world. We're going to absorb the shocks that the world responded to China's growth.
And actually, the people who came to China, they experience life here. They actually have a better understanding about the real China, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's also another benefit.
All right. So I want to move on to maybe the next year. What shall we expect next year? Han Wenxiu, a senior economic official, recently said that expect a lot of very substantial policies to be released after the 2 sessions of 2025, which is probably in March or in the spring of next year. Would you care to maybe take a prediction of what kind of substantial policy may be up the sleeves of the Chinese central government?
Actually, I have no idea, right? I can only give my wish list.
But if we look at the Central Economic Work Conference, that I gather contains a lot of hints.
Yeah, I think the first hint is to do more income transfer to low-income people, right? We already talked about this, right? That's very important. I think that's also going to be very effective because the the propensity of consumption of poorer people is much higher, right? They don't save that much, okay? So that's a right move. Second, I would like to see this central government give more spending power to local governments. We already talked about this tax transfer to local government. That's not enough, right? We have to take care of local government's deficits effectively, okay? So that's second. And third, probably the central government should go down to the housing market and then buy excessive apartments on its own. Now the central government has already issued a policy for local governments to do that. But local governments are constrained, physically constrained. They don't have enough funds to do that, right? So probably now it's time for the central government to move. I mean, the stock market is a good example, right? When the central government began to ask the financial institutions to get into the market, then the market boomed, all right, and also stabilized at I think now around 3,500, right? So that's good. That's a good example. When the central government puts the money into the market, then people is going to believe, right? The same thing is going to be true for the housing market. If the central government puts money to buy excess of apartments, then people will come out and buy those apartments. Mm-hmm. Some people may say, hey, we don't have that appetite to buy more apartments. That's wrong. I have read many predictions for China's so-called steady state purchase. Most estimates put between 1 billion to 1.2 billion square meters. But this year we're going to sell, I think, around 800 million square meters. Right. So there's still like 300 to 400 million gap over there, right? So people still have this appetite to buy new apartments. Okay.
So demand for more houses is real.
Yeah, I think that's real. All right. So that's the third thing. Fourth, we have to talk about. I hope that the central bank is going to substantially lower the interest rate, right, and also normalize lending in all sectors.
Well, I think, yes, thank you, Professor Yao, for joining us today. I mean, that was a fantastic review of what happened this year and a preview of what is yet to come next year. And I think after your elaboration, we've become much more clear about, you know, the state we're in and also the path we're undertaking. And thank you for joining us. That is all for the program today. If you haven't, check out Professor Yao's book, China and the West, A Pragmatic Confucian's Views. It's on Amazon. So thank you for joining us again, and we hope to see you soon.